Welcome to Now Serving a Side of Therapy, a client's introductory guide into the therapeutic world. Be sure to follow, subscribe, and comment on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. To schedule a therapy appointment, call us at 650-223-5605. For more information on this and other related topics, check out our blog at isotherapy.com, where you can also contact us through our website. I'm your host, Dalton Huckaby, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm grateful you joined me. Hey everyone, Dalton Huckaby here, licensed marriage and family therapist, host of Now Serving a Side of Therapy podcast. And today marks the first episode where we're taking a little bit of a turn in the way that I'm making the podcast episode. In that, I wanted to expand and offer my own insights and some research into Lindsay's discussion around grief and loss. In a short moment, I'm going to go over a guide that you can use as a tool that can engage you in your own individualized grief and loss process. And that's something that actually Lindsay created, and it's on the Isotherapy website. When we talk about grief and loss, I like to refer to the definition outlined in John W. James's and Russell Friedman's The Grief Recovery Handbook. Now, they define grief as the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. Gabor Mate will further describe it as something that shouldn't have happened, that did, or something that didn't happen, that should have. Even something as small as our cell phones losing charge, dying of charge, right? Even that can be considered grief and loss related. Now, for the purposes of the discussion in this episode, it'll mostly revolve around grief and loss in response to the death of a loved one, but you might be able to see how the guidebook or the topic of discussion might even help you in processing other forms of grief and loss as well. Now, I have a working theory that when we carry around unresolved aspects of grief and loss, they can build up and contribute to onset of anxiety and depression. So many things can contribute to anxiety and depression, right? And I have this working theory that unresolved aspects of grief and loss can contribute to that as well. In fact, research shows that 40% of bereaved individuals meet the criteria for depression in the first month after the loss, and 24% will exhibit those symptoms after 2 months of the loss. So have you ever experienced the loss of a loved one and didn't know how to navigate through the grief and loss process? Or even how to make sense of it all? Like, I remember when my dad died and I was driving down the freeway and I had to pull the car over because I became overwhelmed with emotions, right? Or even when I was in the grocery store, right? Grief and loss can come up out of nowhere, even when we least expect it. And so that's the thing, like, we're kind of powerless over it. Yet if we can learn how to recognize it, which will be part of this process, right? We can learn how to work with it. You may have heard, while we all experience the same loss, for example, if, my dad died, my brother and I both had the same loss of our father dying, right? But we each have our own way of grieving. And there are a few things that go into that. This aspect of a differential grief acknowledges that grief can come from the destruction of the meaning that is drawn from the significant, unique relationship that we've had. So even though both of our dad had died, my brother has a unique relationship with him than I did, and I had a different relationship with them. And so therein, we might be able to share some of the similarities that we have in that grieving process, but also at the same time, we can recognize how our own reconstruction process as a result of the loss, even that can see how it's more of a personal process. So again, to highlight some aspects there, while we may experience the same loss, our grieving response is individualized, meaning we have our own process of making sense of this new reality. And so this idea of loss and differential grief in families comes from Kathleen R. Gilbert's article, We've Had the Same Loss, Why Don't We Have the Same Grief? And in that article, she goes on to explain that sometimes the grieving process can be in relation to the family unit as well. So some people, in fact, might hide their grief, right, in an attempt to think that they're making a sense of calm. Right? Or maybe they avoid their own healing because they think that their grieving process isn't as important as others, right? So they might even dismiss their own healing in an attempt to try to support others. We can see, right, how family roles might fall into play there. Either way, it is by going through our own healing process that enables us to be there for others in a way that encourages open and honest communication, which is an essential element deemed as part of the grief resolution in a family unit. Now, all that being said, there are common stages that can help us better understand ourselves and to support others when we were in that grieving process. I consider these are considered, Gilbert considers these the 3 R's, right? Recognize, reorganize, and reinvest. Okay, we need to be able to recognize what's coming up for us and how do we reorganize our lives after that person is now out of our lives. We have to reorganize. Maybe my dad, maybe he was always coming over and doing all my handyman work at my house, right? And so as a result of that, right, I need to kind of figure out, okay, well, now how am I going to get help around someone filling that void, right? That role that he provided. And so that's where the reinvesting part comes in. It's like, okay, we're still honoring the person who died, but we still need to reinvest what their role and what we might have found as a need, right, for that loss that we're experiencing. So again, recognizing what's coming up for us, how do we reorganize and shift our lives in such a way that is based on a new reality, right? We're now creating a new reality because that person's no longer with us, and yet by still honoring their spirit, we can still figure out how to reinvest our lives such that we can still continue to strive to honor that person, right? Honor them and their spirit, while also still striving to find other ways that fills that void or meets that need that they had provided. So hopefully that part makes sense. And so as we get into this guide, right, it's on the Isotherapy website, and it will guide you through some reflection processes, right, around the grief and loss that you might be experiencing. The thing is that there is no rush around this, right? There's no right or wrong way, but in fact, how we show up for our lives and support our own mental and emotional well-being and healing can then better position us to support others as well. And this serves as an approach toward individual healing, which allows us to be able to explore with curiosity and compassion our own path toward healing from grief and loss. And so what you'll see here in the Grief and Loss Handbook, say, for example, I like to go, just make it simple here, on page 8, right? On the 8th page here, it says grief can feel really big and heavy sometimes. And what we can do is you can create a memory box, right? So you can go through and identify memories of the person whether they're sad moments, funny moments, things that you miss about them, right? Or even confusing feelings, right? Again, there's no right or wrong here. And so just being able to create that memory box, right, and jot down some of those memories that we have of them can be a way of engaging in our own emotional healing process. And so that's just as a brief example, but feel free to take a look at that guide more online and check out this trailer that from the grief and loss episode that we did with Lindsay, and you can find the full length episode posted in our category wherever our podcast is listed. All right, thanks for tuning in and hope you enjoy.
Grief really isn't something that you just get over. It's something that you really learn to live with, and it changes shape over time. It's more physical, emotional, cognitive, it's relational, it's spiritual. It has so many different forms. Sit with it, deal with it. Although it feels nasty, it is so important because our mental health and our physical health literally are the same thing, and they go hand in hand.
Thanks for tuning in this week. Be sure to check out our next episode as we continue to explore more elements of your therapeutic journey.